Halo, Assalamualaikum. Oh, lagi ke-mute tadi ya, sorry ya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ketemu lagi bareng saya, Borrys Hasian, di channel Design Chit-Chat. Kali ini kita akan kedatangan tamu special guest, orang bule ya, orang Jerman. Nah, jadi kita sesinya bakal dalam bahasa Inggris ya. Jadi kesempatan nih buat yang sempat kita diskusi juga waktu itu tentang apa, perlunya kita orang bisa bahasa Inggris. Nah, ini kita akan pakai bahasa Inggris. Kita akan panggil dulu langsung aja bintang tamunya, nggak pakai lama. Sebentar, biasa ada kayak ini dulu ya. Wolfi,
Hi, hi,
apa kabar Wolfi? Apa kabar?
hi, Borrys. Thank you so much for having me. And
Yeah.
I feel very embarrassed. I didn't understand the word you were saying earlier.
No, I was saying that we're gonna have like a German star, TV star.
Well,
So, okay, before we start, okay, we have so far several people here, but some has also like have joined as well. So, you wanna do this we'll do of Deutsch or the Indonesia expression or
well, I,
huh?
I am happy to do it in German as well.
Okay,
I
okay.
have been practicing my German.
Okay, okay, so Indonesia special expression, yeah. Okay, okay. So I'm gonna mix ya, Wolfie between Indonesia and English ya, if you don't mind. Oke, so yang baru join, tadi saya nanya ke Wolfie sih mau pakai bahasa Jerman atau bahasa Indonesia. Kayaknya Wolfie mau pakai bahasa Jerman katanya, tapi kita English aja ya. Oke, kita langsung mulai aja. Wolfie, you can introduce yourself and then we can straight go to your slides.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Boris. Yeah, how to introduce myself? I'm Wolfie. Everybody calls me Wolfie. I'm from Germany, and I took over the design operations functions in Gojek. I have been a design consultant for most of my professional life, but then shifted into a product company and really found my calling in design operations, trying to identify opportunities to increase the effectiveness and the quality of design and overall elevating the craft of design at Gojek. And usually, when I speak publicly, I always have to introduce Gojek, but I feel today in the audience, everybody knows the company. Yeah, and I'm very, very happy to be here. And I hope that I can add some value to the audience. I know this profession of ours, design, is still often construed for this making things pretty, right? And I have been thinking a lot about this idea of objectivity in design and how we can actually use methods and the principled approach to move away from this ambiguity of like personal taste and preferences, etc. So I hope we can speak about this a little bit today. And yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Oke. Uh, Sebentar ini, sorry, I'm gonna also like mix in Indonesia. Ada yang bilang Sugeng Rawuh, saya nggak tahu itu artinya apa ya, but something like mungkin selamat welcome, probably ya, welcome Mister from Ikhwan. Uh, so some use a mix of language here. Also, someone using like I think Japanese language. I'm not really sure what it means, but yeah. Anyway, something like welcome probably. I guess. Okay. Also like to introduce to everyone that Wolfie also like we were in the same team at Gojek. So Wolfie is very heavy on processes, improving things like design process. So we have something like probably Wolfie will tell later, but we have developed what we call the Go Design, which is Gojek design process, and Wolfie was the one who's driving it under design strategy stream. So I think Wolfie will share a lot of his experience with us in building ops. Especially I think Indonesia, Wolfie. I think I'm not sure in India, but ops as well in many of the companies is pretty like new things, right? And it's very quite different from one to the other company. Uh, so I think probably
Yes.
you can share first like your experience, and then probably we'll open the Q&A, and then people can ask more questions.
Absolutely.
And sorry for yang sorry, I'm gonna miss Indonesian as well. Yang lain kalau ada pertanyaan dalam bahasa Indonesia, feel free to ask in Indonesia, and then I will translate to German, not German, but Indonesia. English, sorry. I mixed up with the two language, German, English, and English. Okay, Wolfie, the stage is yours. I'm gonna add your slides here, and then you'll be the main presenter. Okay.
Awesome, wonderful. Thank you, Boris. Maybe just to answer your question earlier, right? It's true. Design ops is a very new profession, a new branch of the industry, and I feel not very companies invest in this yet. But for us, it was just a question of time to operate a team of like 100 plus designers, a team of our size at Gojek. It needs people who dedicate themselves towards trying to make the team more effective. So that is why the design ops was initiated. Maybe we can come back to this also, like after the presentation. I put together a couple of slides. It's not very much, just to give us a foundation for the conversation afterwards, which is about like understanding like this principled approach towards designing. I'm assuming that everybody can see my screen now, right, Boris?
Yes.
Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you.
People are seeing the same as what we see right now.
Okay, awesome.
And this one is streamed to 3 channels, right? So it's to LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. So expect get more followers after this, Wolfie. Oh yeah, before I forget, so anyone, you can always follow Wolfie here on his Twitter. And Wolfie likes to have discussions, so I mean, feel free to reach out to him. I'm sure he'll be happy to talk and discuss with you. Okay, Wolfie.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm just jumping into my slides. It's just a few slides. I'm a design ops practitioner. I'm not a fancy visual designer, so please excuse me if my slides are not as stunning as other speakers might have on this channel, but I'm focusing mostly on the content. So I just wanted to start everybody off. I'm assuming most of the audience is maybe a designer in a product company or looking for a job or in an agency or consulting or freelancing. But I'm pretty sure everybody knows this feeling of like being in a design review, in a design critique, a feedback session, or like a review with a client. And this feeling of like things are just getting ripped apart. What I talk about are things like where people talk about their opinions, they talk about their personal tastes, what they like, what they don't like. It's an overall lack of objectivity. People just like, yeah, it doesn't work for me. Make it pop, make it bigger. All of those things I'm sure all of us have heard a million times. And also where you have done your homework, right? You have done your research, you've done your tests, you have done your analysis, and still it's just not enough to convince the stakeholders. Another thing that we all know is this idea of being handed down requirements. People just come to you, whether you're a freelancer or you're employed, and just come, can you just get this done for me? They're not explaining you why, they're not explaining you what this is for, what problem it's solving. You just got to do it. And the other thing that I also often experience is just this idea of being stuck in a process, right? Where you fail to see things from new perspectives, from new view angles, and it's just very hard to move forward. And I'm sure we all have dealt with hippos in our professional life. I really like this abbreviation, the highest paid person's opinion. I know we've all been in situations where somebody, just because that person makes more money than we, just says like, no, we just got to do what I say. So I just wanted us to emphasize with this situation because that is where principles become important, right? That is where principles really shine. This is where we introduce like a common language. And this is where like this agreed upon standard can actually help. If you all know and believe in the same thing to be right or wrong, you actually don't need these kind of personal opinions anymore. And you don't need it to be a question of personal taste. You can actually look at your principles and take this as a basis for decision making. This also can mean heuristics. I'm sure that most of you are familiar with the concept of heuristics, this idea of like universal truths that either are violated or not. And of course, as designers, we work a lot with first principles, and sometimes it's also really, really good to call them out specifically. So it's almost obvious that principles are a good idea, but bringing them to life is not quite the same and is also quite difficult. So for us, maybe we can talk a little bit about here also, how does this actually translate into like a large organization like Gojek? And just to bring everybody up to speed, right? We're talking about like a rapidly growing organization. We have now about 150 designers. We have like 20 plus product verticals and functional teams. We have offices in multiple countries. We operate in multiple countries. We have customers in different countries. So it's a huge, huge organization. And you can probably imagine how hard it is to actually believe in the same things, to actually share knowledge, to actually share an understanding of what great design looks like, what great outcomes look like, what great processes look like. So it is really, really critical for us in order to be effective to have this shared understanding, to have this sense of objectivity. This is what we really needed, a common language, objectivity, agreed upon standards. This is the way for us to move forward. Excuse my selection of GIFs here. I just felt this would make the presentation more alive. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we get there and the process that we follow at Gojek, and a process that all of you follow also in the audience, right? The very famous double diamond framework. And that is also a uniqueness about Gojek. In our discovery, for us, developing principles is a unique task, because for us, it was building it on a wealth of experiences. At Gojek, we had like 4 years of running design critiques, design reviews, all sorts of presentations and design showcases. We had a huge amount of experiences of all the things that went wrong in the past. And we could use this to analyze and build principles that would serve our purpose, that would make it an agreed upon standard. In many cases, you don't have this kind of past experience to build upon, but you still need to start with thinking of like, what are the principles that should guide decision making? What are the principles that help us to decide between right or wrong? What are the principles that can tell us whether we reached our goal or not? So for us, discovery really meant going through all the years of experiences, of all the design reviews, critiques, feedback sessions, all of those things, and just collect evidence of a lot of things that went wrong. Definition for us was then to really club those things together. In research, we call this affinity mapping. For us, it was about to identify meaningful clusters, meaningful groups of themes, of principles that would fit together. And after that, started the design process. And I call this here design and align, because that is what we realized is the most critical for introducing design principles into an organization. For it to be agreed upon, for it to be shared, all the people actually have to agree to it, which meant we had to go around, and whenever we phrase the principle, let's say one of our principles is keep it ethical, we actually needed to go around and make sure that everybody that we work with, the product designers, the product managers, the engineers, the business people, all the people who are involved in the product development needed to agree on this. So this was a very tedious process of going around making sure that everybody agreed upon what we're actually trying to do. And once we had this, we started the development of the principles. And I call this here development and implement, because again, just having principles, just writing them down somewhere is not enough. It wasn't enough for us. We needed to make sure that they get into the hand of every designer. We needed to make sure that they are there in every review, in every feedback session, etc. So we made a whole bunch of things. We started making these like beautiful physical cards that people can carry around. We planned to have them as physical cards, but because of COVID and we all went into work from home, we have digital cards. So we built like a Slack app, for example, where we can pull in these principles into conversations, into reviews. We presented them at company all hands. We presented them in our design meetings. We've conducted workshops with all the design teams and product teams and functional teams to make sure that everybody is aware of what those principles are, why they exist, how they can be used. Yeah, but with, in order to not talk more about like the backstory of the principles, I also wanted to talk about what those principles actually are for us, right? So that you can really understand also how they are applied in action. And as you can see in the picture here, we have a total of 16 principles, but I didn't want to talk about all. I just wanted to talk about a few of them that I felt are maybe the most relevant to the audience. But if you want to go into detail, we can do this after the short presentation. I just picked out 7 of these. The first one being start with the problem, not the solution. I think this is the first principle that we all agreed on and was very, very clear and very straightforward. And it's probably also one of the most important aspects of our work. Start with the problem, not the solution. If you remember earlier, this idea of being handed down requirements, it's the lack of problem definition that actually makes it fail, right? It's the lack of clarity of what is actually the problem that we're trying to solve. How many times have people come to me and saying like, can you just build this? Can you just build this? And I had to repeatedly ask why? What is the problem we're trying to solve? So starting with the problem, not the solution, is, I think, our number one principle. And the second one that I really wanted to talk about today is the principle, what's good for the customer is good for the business. This was probably the most contentious principle. As designers, especially when you're employed in startups or tech companies, you always have this idea of like design against business. Designers care about the customers, business people care about the numbers, and there's an everlasting conflict between the two functions. And the principle would be what? Balance business goals with user needs. It's all about the balance. But what people often fail to understand is that there is this mutual dependency. Design is a part of business, and business is a part of design. There is a mutual dependency amongst the two, but it's not going in equal directions, right? First comes the customer centricity, and because of that comes the business success. And it was really, it took us a long time to get this right, to really see that because we're customer centric, we will also be successful in business. And actually, this is something that everybody at Gojek believes in. And we're all quite happy to have this clear for us. Then we have a principle, leave no customer behind, right? Is our design accessible? Are accessibility criteria being followed, right? Is the contrast ratio there? Is the screen reader capability built in? All of those things. Are we actually building products that are accessible for all? Especially in countries like Indonesia, where you have like monsoons and crazy weather, devices are sometimes old. They're not held in the hand. They're maybe in the breast pocket. False activation. So many things can go wrong. So it's important to remember to not leave any customer behind. Then we have one principle: get everyone to collaborate. And that was also really important for us because we realized it's really important that we keep talking to each other. That designers talk to product managers, that engineers talk to researchers, that product managers talk to business people, and that we involve each other early on in the design process, in the product development process. So we have a principle to remind everyone this is really, really important to us. Then we have 3 very output-focused or execution-focused principles. Make it obvious, make it consistent, make it beautiful. And of course, this is like the bread and butter of design work, right? Make it obvious means make it self-explanatory, make it consistent, right? We all know the value of consistency across different verticals of a product to make really sure that the checkout flow has the same kind of consistent language than the login or the sign up or the exploration flow, etc. And of course, make it beautiful, right? What we do at the end of the day also has to uphold a very, very high aesthetic standard, because there is a lot of data proving that apps that are designed better, that are looking better, also work better. Then we have 2 more: explore all possible solutions. This is all about the breadth of ideas, right? This is something that I constantly also tell myself, a reminder to myself, like if I'm stuck, have I really explored all possible solutions? Have I gotten broad enough? Do I have enough confidence that because I explored enough, I know that the solution I'm suggesting is actually the best possible solution? So this idea of going broad and really, really exploring is, I think, again, bread and butter for a designer, but a very, very important reminder to self and to others as well. And then we have validate early, validate often. This is sometimes hard if you're a consultant or like a freelancer, because you have to fight for conducting more research. But it's so important to like start early on to make sure that the hypotheses that we have, that the assumptions we make are actually being validated. This can happen through a quick concept evaluation, a few interviews to a few potential customers. But this early validation and the frequent validation is not something that is nice to have in a process. It is so important because it also minimizes risk. And minimizing risk is something I want to talk more about also later on. But here I just wanted to give you like a brief overview over some of the principles that we use at Gojek. So what does this mean for us, right? After actually launching these principles in Gojek and making sure that they're used everywhere, they're used in Slack, then people writing product documentations or spec documentations or any kind of documentation, requirement documentation, anything, there are principles also there, right? Now, every project almost that we start with the principles. What are the guiding principles? What principles will guide decision making? Right? What principles will we use to determine whether we are in the wrong direction or right direction? And sometimes these principles come from our design principles. Sometimes they're also other principles, right? Because this set of 16 principles is not all encompassing. There are other areas. And depending on like the specific nature, the specific context of any kind of project that we work on, we set first what are the principles that will guide decision making. Because that is the goal, right? How can we take better decisions? How can we take decisions faster? How can we make decisions risk-free? How can we be confident that we are taking the right call? So that is what we've learned. And there are a couple of takeaways, of course, that are critical for me personally, as well as for our design team. And this is this idea of elevating the conversation. We all know this opinion-based reviews, this opinion-based, I don't like it, I just don't get the design, I don't like the blue, I don't think our users will like it. All assumptions, all opinions, all biases. But principles really allow us to elevate this conversation and make it not personal. We make it a matter of principle. So by doing so, we also like eliminating these hierarchies. Just because somebody has a higher job title in a meeting, if you can actually use a principle to make a point, it is no longer whether it comes from you or it comes from somebody else. It's actually about following the principle that all of you have agreed upon. So I also like this idea of using principles as leverage, right? It's leverage that allows us to push for what we believe is important. It's leverage to push for the things that matter for our customers, that we agreed upon, that are the goals, that are the objectives of it. And I also like to call out here that often principles give us like ammunition or the vocabulary. I like to call it ammunition, right? Because sometimes we are struggling to like identify why we are upset with the feedback. Sometimes we're struggling to really phrase it. Sometimes we're struggling to like find the right words to describe what we're trying to say. Principles can really help here to provide the vocabulary to do so. And then getting unstuck, right? How often have I been in a design project and felt like, what am I supposed to do now? Like, am I not asking the right kind of questions? Am I stuck? Am I not exploring enough? And that's where I look at those principles. I browse through them and I always get new perspectives and new insights on how to look at my current problem. And the last part here is, to keep yourself and also others in check, right? Principle violations is not only like the moral police where we go around and checking, like, is everybody doing well? But it's a really, really good tool to make sure that everybody is actually following high standards. It's about making sure that the bar is high. The bar for quality is high. It's not getting lower because the principles need to be followed by all. And these are some of the takeaways for me personally and for our team, why we love to work with principles. But I also want to take this a little forward. What does that really mean? what does that really mean to like use principles in design and sort of like close the loop on the question of how to bring objectivity into design, right? Because what I often do in my job is look at projects, sometimes large projects, and look at them and ask, why did they fail? What went wrong? Why did it go so terribly wrong? What did we miss? And oftentimes we come to the conclusion there was a lack of problem definition. We really didn't explore enough. Our launch was not right. We didn't set ourselves up to collect the right kind of data. There are all sorts of reasons. But these are always principle violations. And if you look at projects that went incredibly well, you can also see that those projects had a principled approach. Now, the thing that I hear a lot is designers coming to me and saying, like, yeah, but we just don't have the authority. Like, as a consultant, the client is paying you the money, so the client is deciding what gets done. But the truth is, if you turn this around, and that's where the idea of risk comes again in, right? If you want to conduct more research because you really, really thoroughly believe that this is what's required, you can ask a client, are you willing to take the risk to launch a bad product and might risk the entire survival of your organization? Is it really worth launching it 2 weeks earlier? Is the investment of 2 weeks of research justifiable to make sure to reduce the risk of failure, to make sure that the product we're building is solving an actual problem? So principles give you the power, they give you the leverage to claim authority. Principles distribute the authority across teams. It is no longer important if it's the boss's opinion or the intern's opinion. If principles exist, they need to be followed. And I love this idea, again, coming back to this thought of like that principles can be ammunition, right? They can be ammunition in like a negotiation, in a review, to make sure that the right things get done. And yeah, with this, I wanted to end and hopefully start a conversation with all of you and with Borrys about this principled approach to design. Over to you, Borrys.
Yes, I was just sending a message to the YouTube and Facebook that anyone who wants to talk directly to Wolfie, this is a good opportunity for you to join the live streaming. So I have shared with you all the link there on Design Chit-Chat on Facebook and also on the YouTube. Okay, I got tons of questions, Wolfie. I I I wonder, like, people, some they ask some. Okay, I think we should just answering question, even though it's not really related to our topic. But okay, just like a warming up. Okay, so from Abid Famasha, can we say that design ops is quite similar with product manager for designers?
I wouldn't think so. The truth is, if you ask 10 different design ops professionals, you get 10 different answers. The industry is still very young, the profession is still very young, and many people are still trying to define what it precisely is that we are doing, right? For me, it is fairly simple, right? Design owns the human experience, product owns the business, right? So that is, we are not product folks in that sense. We are the owners and gatekeepers of the human experience. And what means design ops in that context? It means operationalizing, owning the human experience. Our job is to equip designers, for example, to be better at negotiating, to be better at using principles to push for the things that our customers need, right? It's not a product manager's job to do that. I would probably use a different term there, right? It's the idea of the servant leader, because we are not managing the design team, we are serving it. We're trying to find out like what could possibly make them more effective, what could help them to be better at their craft, what do they need to be more balanced in their work life, what do they need to feel safer at work, what do we need to strengthen our culture, etc. And then we chase after that. I think the idea of a product manager is to manage. We are not managing, we are serving.
Okay.
I
All
hope
right.
this answers the question.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much clear. Feel free to ask more questions if anything is unclear. So, okay, so I think from Office answer is pretty clear that the difference, right? When you say product manager is managing, but here is really we are. I think Wolfie also mentioned several times that it's about making the designers more effective in building or crafting the product or the design, right? So that's not really managing, I would say. Okay, since you mentioned about the product managers, Rofi, and you say product managers is for business, design for the users. Uh, how long did it take for Gojek to shift from the business to customer centricity? So because you mentioned that, okay, recently, so it's like before, it's not really that kind of, business centric. So how long did it take to be? So that's the first question. I'm gonna ask another
Mm.
questions first. Yeah. So and also like, does it mean that in the beginning all companies should be business centric first and only being customer centric later?
Yeah. So I'll give you a short answer and I give you like a medium answer if that's okay. I think the short answer is it's a process, right? It's a never-ending process. I think we started that process, but I don't think any company has finished that process of actually being customer centric, right? But some companies are better than others. And I'd like to believe that Gojek is ahead of the wave in terms of the customer centricity. I think what people only now start to understand, right? And that's the medium answer, is there, especially in tech, there are three pieces of the puzzle that have to fit together. There's the customer perspective, there's the business perspective, and there's the technology perspective. And we have evidence for many startups and companies that are centered around the business. And that is not a guaranteed success. And there are a lot, even more startups focused around technology, where people build things just because they can build it, but it actually doesn't solve a need. And neither are those are successful. The truly successful companies are the ones who realize that both of these, business and technology, have to actually be built around customers. It took me a while. It sounds so simple, but it took me also a while to like see this as that clearly, that it's just identifying an actual problem that people face, an actual opportunity how to improve somebody's life. And as simple as that, and if you have this, you build the business around it and you find the technology to solve for it. And then you have a chance at succeeding at something. But
Mm,
that's what I feel is like there's a deep, deep logic to first come with a problem and then the business and the technology. It's all a negotiation. It's all a conversation. But the center is the customer. The center is an actual problem, an actual opportunity, not some made up
mm,
potential,
yeah.
right?
Wolfie is always good at answering a very, in a diplomatic way. But yes, so I agree that like some might be better, some like there's like they have like a very different stage in being customer centricity, right? And then of course like probably Gojek also like has learned for many years that now actually only realizing as well that okay it should be the customer first that come, and then I think
Mm,
Gojek has always also been customer centric, right? It's just like not, I don't know. So this bring me to another questions, right? So the principles just came 2019,
mm,
2020 or 2020, right? So means before there's no principles, or so how does it work? For example, like so because we also want to like people who watch this, they might come from like small startups, and then
mhm,
some. I think I saw a question as well, like how do we start if you don't have okay, like this one. So is there a way to create principle for a smaller team, right? So you mentioned about being having a wealth of experience, like 4 plus 5 years of design critics. So how can we, like how can people replicate this process?
mhm.
And then also like before principles exist in Gojek, so what was used then to like to guide the product design or development?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to believe that principles might have existed even though people didn't write them down, but they were not shared. They were not common across teams. So you have always designers who are like more senior, who are better at storytelling, who are better at negotiating, who are better at like influencing stakeholders, and then they get things done. But you also have a lot of examples where things got delayed, where things were unclear, where projects had to be backtracked. And not that all the projects were failures at Gojek. Many succeeded greatly, but it's important to look at the ones that didn't and try to understand what went wrong there. So the absence of clearly formulated principles doesn't necessarily mean that there are no principles, right? For example, ethics is something that I believe Gojek always believed in, that we wanted to be an ethical company. We always believed in having social impact. That's not something that was written down in form of a design principle or product principle, but it was agreed upon, even though it was non-verbally. But also to come back to the question of Siri, I hope I pronounce it correctly. Absolutely, it is possible to create principles. And I feel it's just a fantastic way to start a project, to get the stakeholders into a room, get them around a whiteboard and ask, what are actually the guiding principles? What are the principles that should guide decision making in this process, right? If we have a conflict between speed and quality, how are we going to resolve it? Like, what is the goal here? What are compromises that we are not willing to take? When it comes to, we all know sometimes speed is important, sometimes quality is important. Where do we draw the line? It's a very, very good idea to start a project talking about this. A principle approach also means, for example, to get clarity on who does what, to get very, very clear understanding on how responsibilities and decision-making power is distributed. And there is no one-size-fits-all solution, except for it's a very, very good place to start a project with. I personally feel that, for example, a principle like what's good for the customer is good for the business almost fits everywhere, right? And the same way, start with the problem, not the solution, right? It's clear to everybody. Let's say you're in a contract with a client and you want to agree on those principles. It's very doubtful that the client would be against this because obviously it's in the best interest of the outcome of the project to do it this way. But once it's written down and all stakeholders and decision makers and executioners of the project agree on it, you can use that and saying like, wait a second, we are changing the scope of the project. How many times have I been in projects, and in Borrys, you must have been in millions of projects where suddenly mid-project the scope changes, new requirements are being added, suddenly deadlines are shifting, teams change. And when you can say like, wait a second, are we actually still trying to solve the same problem? It's a very, very powerful thing to come back to if you have started with it.
Okay. So Siri, you can always start with small team and then like Wolf is suggested to have stakeholders sit and start the discussion. I think one of the things that you can use is try to imagine like what would be the ideal principles you want to have, and also of course you all can always copy Gojek principles first and then adjust later, right?
Yes, of course. Just take hours and change
I was
them
like
to
wondering because you mentioned about there are 16 and you only show us 7, so does it mean like the other 9 are confidential, or is something that you can share as well with the audience?
I can share. Should I share this, Boris? Do we have time for this? I can do it quickly.
Yes.
I'm happy to share them. I just didn't want to spend too much time on it either.
Yes, but before you share, I think we have someone online, so I'm gonna put I think it's her to the stream first. Sorry, is it Debbie, or do you want to ask the questions directly to Wolfie? Okay. No? Okay. I'm gonna remove, yeah. 1, 2, 3. Okay, remove. Okay. All right. I think if it's okay, I think also like I've been waiting as well for the principles to be shared. I think this is gonna be the first year of year. This will be shared online. Sorry, to public. The 16 principles. Have you shared this before?
Only in sort of like closed environments, yeah.
Okay. Is it okay to share the principles or?
I don't see any reason why not. I mean, by
Okay.
all means, if more people follow these kind of principles, it's good for everybody. It's good for
Is it
customers.
on your screen or
Yes, let me share the screen again.
should I close? Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, sorry. I
So
think
I'm not,
we, yeah,
yeah.
sorry. So this one?
So I'm not having an image for every card. I would need to like pull this up from elsewhere, but I know the principles very well. So I can go through them. You know the first one, start with the problem, not the solution. We've discussed this. Very, very important. The second one is know what great looks like. So this is all about success, defining what success looks like. It's all about metrics, making sure that you actually know when you've achieved your goal, when you succeed, and also when you fail. It's important to really know this. Like when can you call it a failure? When can you call it a success? Then we have the third one, what's good for the customer is good for the business. We've discussed this in detail. The fourth one is know all your constraints to ship. This is all about understanding the boundaries of a project, right? Are there technological constraints? Are there maybe governmental regulations or laws that you have to follow? Are there any kind of other business regulations that you have to keep in mind? So it's really, really important to know them in order for you to be effective. Only if you know the boundary can you really, really make the most out of it. This could be something as simple as talking to an engineer early in the project and asking, what of this can you actually build? And that engineer will be happy to tell you what is within their capabilities and what is not. Then we have the fifth principle. As you can see, we have structured them in like 4 different groups. The first group was all about impactful design. The second group, which I'm talking about now, is all about the inclusive design. So we have leave no customer behind, number 5. We've talked about this also. We've talked about number 6, keep it ethical. I feel it's so important to make sure that we don't use dark patterns, all of those things, right? That payment gateways are clear, that all these sign-up flows, etc., are like transparent, etc. Number 7, get everyone to collaborate. We've talked about this also before. And number 8, give back to your community. That's a very, very interesting one because at Gojek, I'll be honest, the number of cool things that we do does not match the number of things that we speak about. There's a lot of cool things happening that we don't talk about publicly. And so actually give back to the community is quite important. This could mean blog posts, social media engagements, speaking engagements at conferences, going to local meetups, writing articles, etc., etc. So this should be like part of a project, not only like to see it through, to finish it off, to launch it to the public, but also to write the article, apply for conferences, etc. Then we have the next group of principles. This is all about intuitive design. So here we had the principles about make it obvious, make it consistent, make it beautiful. But also here, number 11, this is called do not lose the human touch. This is all about understanding emotions and understanding that evoking the appropriate emotions is important, right? It's not always joy. If you design a payment gateway, right, it's really important that the customers can focus, that they really understand the implications of their actions, etc. So it's really important to understand the emotional aspect of your design and when to trigger what. And the last group of principles is about the iterative design. So here we have number 13, explore all possible solutions. We spoke about this also. Number 14 is called pick what is best, not what is easy. So this one is all about product prioritization, right? How do we choose the right one right path to work on? And oftentimes stakeholders push us into like the easiest way, but that is not always the best way for the customers. So it's a good reminder to make sure that we pick what is right, not what is easy. And then we have number 15, validate early, validate often. We spoke about this also today. And the last one is launch to learn. Launch to learn is fairly obvious, right? You got to launch it for it to have impact. But this principle is also about like planning the launch correctly. Are we collecting the right kind of data? Are we set up to speak to customers after it's launched? Are we doing like a post-launch evaluation, etc.? So are we setting ourselves up that we can actually learn from the launch? So yeah, that in a nutshell are the 16 principles, the 16 formata design principles. We call them formata in Gojek. Formata because of the 4 I's. It's a bit of a pun because we have impactful, inclusive, iterative, intuitive. So we have the 4 I's, and that became formata because of the word mata. I don't know whether the pun actually works in Bahasa Indonesia, but that's what we call them.
Yeah, yeah. There you go. You have the 16 principles that you can use, but of course, in like in any insights, any knowledge that is always need to be relevant to your case, right? So, take this as a first step, and I think this also like bring probably all of you to my question of like if people want to, so you have shared like, okay, to start as a small team, then you can sit with the stakeholders. But if, for example, they want to start tomorrow, is there any like practical advice that they can give to the audience on how to start this initiative to create the design principle? Is it like very, like tangible things they can do tomorrow? Yeah.
So the truth is, many companies have design principles, and many of them have them publicly available, right? Like a simple Google search will bring you a lot of really interesting first principles. They will also bring you like to design principles of other companies like Spotify, etc., Apple. There's a lot of literature being written on what those principles can be, and I feel that is actually the fun part. So getting together, understanding the context of your project or of your work, and finding a set of principles that fits that purpose. This can be inspired by all sorts of principles, right? Our 16, they make sense for us at Gojek because they reflect our experience and our business. Some of them are universal, some of them might not be. So the first step is, of course, to find those principles, identify those principles. And the second one is make sure that everybody agrees on them, because otherwise it's just goal or maybe a wish list. But principles are then powerful if everybody agrees upon. And that is the hard part, because you have to convince a stakeholder or a client or a senior person or a business leader that they should follow these, right? So the way to do this is to make sure that these principles are actually not serving you as a designer, but they're serving the customer, they're serving the positive outcome of the project. If you can build this case that following these principles will lead to a better result for the business, for the customer, for the technology, it's a very easy negotiation to convince a stakeholder to agree to a principle. Even if it's something as difficult as what's good for the customer is good for the business, right? It's a principle that people can agree on. So if you find that connection between what is right and also what makes sense for the business, you have a much easier job convincing the people to agree on them. And once you have a set, right, print it out, make it into a poster, put it everywhere in the office, make it into a wallpaper, make sure that people see it every day, bring it up in every conversation, bring it up in every review, not only for violations, but also when people follow it. Oh, awesome. This is a great example of how you followed this principle, right? It doesn't have to be like only used in a negative context. So for me, these are the two main steps, right? Identify the principles. That's fun. You can explore, you can like really find like what's right for your particular project. You can choose from many resources like Gojek, for example, and others, and then get everybody to agree upon.
Okay. All right. Also, like one thing to note for everyone that the principle is not just about the product. So I feel like I remember that one of the key decisions we made at that time was to not just focusing on the product principles, but also, as you can see from what Wolfie has shared, this is also about like what's good for the customer, good for the business, iteration. So it's just beyond the product experience. So make sure that it covers the process, like also like the customers. So this is a very interesting question from Dea. So we have Dea Chandra. Hasian, can you elaborate more about leave no customer behind?
I'd love to. Yeah, leave no customer behind. On the surface, this can mean follow accessibility guidelines, right? There are certain requirements for color contrast, for screen reader capabilities, certain things that have to be embedded in code, alternative text or images. All of those things are basically publicly known accessibility criteria, right? But that is only part of accessibility. The real, much larger, no, I'm not calling accessible not real. What I'm trying to say is it's not only for people with disabilities, right? It's not only for like a small percentage of customers. Often we hear like, oh yeah, solve it for 95% of customers. So that in itself is unethical. You should aim for 100%. It is not right to leave customers behind. In a market like Indonesia or India, where you have a lot of people, even 1% is a huge business impact. It can be millions of people who like are your customers or aren't because of you being accessible or not. But this goes beyond this. People often forget that disability is not only like a constant part of a person who maybe sits in a wheelchair, or maybe who has an eye impairment, who is blind or deaf. Disability is something that happens constantly, right? It happens when I push my daughter in a pram. It's very hard to push it with one hand, but sometimes I got to take a call, so suddenly I only have one hand to navigate the phone. Suddenly it starts to rain and my phone gets wet, and I have to put it down. Suddenly my shirt maybe gets wet. I put the phone in my breast pocket, and because of the skin conductance, suddenly a button gets a false activation. To actually understand the implications, imagine Jakarta traffic. How hard is it to really hear the other person speaking on the phone? It's not easy, right? Bangalore traffic, India traffic is worse. People are honking all the time, and it's even harder. But there's so many things that actually affect your ability to interact with your digital products, and it's really important to consider those. What happens if suddenly your GPS connection is lost? The GPS accuracy in Indonesia is not very great, right? We have to take this into consideration. What happens if you run out of battery? Like all of those things are disabilities. They might not be permanent, but they're very, very real. And they're very important to consider. So this is what leave no customer behind is really about.
She has the follow-up question. So it's like exploring all possibilities when you start using our products.
You could say that, yeah. It's exploring all scenarios. Yeah.
It's also all
So
context, right? Yeah.
all context, all scenarios, all perspectives. So you see, those principles are not, they're overlapping, right? Sometimes they're even contradicting, right? For example, they're not really contradicting, but they could be. Sometimes we say launch to learn. So you got to launch. But we also say explore all possible solutions, which means I have to spend more time exploring and I can only launch later. So how do you balance this two? So that's what I think is interesting about principles, right? Principles are not the decision. They're the guidelines that help us to make decisions. They're the vocabulary that help us to reach decisions. Based on principles, we can decide, should we focus on a speedy launch or should we focus on a breadth of exploration right now?
There's another interesting follow-up questions related to the possible solutions from Dimas. So what does it mean by exploring all possible solutions? Does it mean from technology or from the design side?
I think both, and more than that, right? Explore all possible solutions can also mean explore different business models, right? It really depends on where you are in your project. Is your scope defined only as designer? Then the principle for you means to explore design solutions, right? But if you're a project manager or program manager or a product manager, this could also mean exploring different technologies to solve the problem, exploring different business models to solve a problem. It's about going broad, right? We all know the double diamond framework. It's important to go broad because only if we explore enough we can have confidence that what we choose is the right thing that we choose. Otherwise, it's just an assumption. If we explore and we test and we validate, we can actually have confidence that what we're building is the right thing, whether it's technology, whether it's business, whether it's design.
Yeah, I think like you mentioned, all of these principles, they're all very connected. So I can also like answer these questions by quoting one principle, which is the first one. So start with the problem, not the solution. So it will always be about the customer. So whether it's going to be technology, design, or something that Wolfie mentioned about business, anything that can solve customer problems, then you should explore the solution. So it can be like a simple probably operation stuff, or not only technology or design. Basically, so go back to the first principle. Start with the problem, not the solution, right? So, okay, all right, Wolfie. You mentioned about like having everyone to use it now at Gojek to start a project, and everyone actually using it in many channels like the Slack you mentioned, not only the card produced because of the COVID, but how do you make sure that not only designers but also products, engineers, and even the management are aligned with these principles? So what are like the key, I don't know, the key moment or key initiative that you think is like that's just a moment where everyone actually align on the principles. Like what's the initiative that you did?
That's a hard question, because this is almost a question about like change management. How do you implement behavioral change, right? It's something that we designers do or try to figure out every day. Like can we actually convince people to change their behavior? So how did we convince Gojek designers, researchers, product managers, business folks to adapt and use design principles? For us, there were three fronts, three layers, or three perspectives that we took. One is the leadership perspective. And the leadership perspective means to share something like a principle in a company all hands, in a design all hands, in like big meetings. It's not in a detailed way. It's just like a 3-minute presentation. Hey, we have these amazing principles and they're going to help us achieve this or this result, right? So everybody in the company knows that principles exist. It's purely educational. It's purely about spreading awareness of them. So that's what I call like the leadership level. Then the next one is the group level. That's where we look at teams. And that's where we conduct workshops. We conducted workshops with every single team. And those workshops were interactive, where we explained like what those principles are, how we arrived at them, and then we went through exercises together. Looking at the past, for example, we shared stories where those principles could have helped avoid mistakes, or where they helped avoid mistakes, right? So we actually reflected on our own experiences in those workshops. And a side effect of this is that we have a wealth of case studies now, of small case studies that prove the effectiveness of our principles, which was a very, very like a good contribution towards people adopting them. So this is the group level, right? This is where it gets like more interactive. That's where it's not only educational, but also interactive. And the third level is the individual level. That is where we go around in one-on-ones, constantly evangelizing and socializing the principles, constantly being on Slack, being parts of design reviews, calling out, hey, this is a principle violation, or hey, good use of this principle here. So it's the combination of all three: the leadership level, which is purely spreading awareness, educational; the group level, which is half awareness, half educational, and half interactive; and the individual level, which is all about like creating very tangible traction. This is how we implemented design principles, and I use this framework today for any kind of project where I need people to get behind an idea. Leadership level, group level, individual level. That's the framework that worked for me, for us.
Yeah, for anyone who wants to learn more, I think I testify Wolfie is really good at doing this kind of all of these things, like approaching even up to individual level, generalizing the design principles, making sure that everyone actually understand it, and and like you mentioned, like pointing out it's like a violation of the principles. I think you should learn from Wolfie. Again, to remind you that you can always add Wolfie on his Twitter, Wolfram, and then you can always
This
like
is
chat
very
and then.
dangerous for this. I'll have to really start becoming more active on Twitter, but I'd love to. I'm a very inexperienced Twitter user, but happy to change this.
I think it's good for like sharing about design and professional things in general. Yeah. Okay. I think we are closer to the end of the session. I get to a question that probably not related to ops, but I think it's good. I also want to make sure that this person, aspiring designer, get answer from Wolfie as well as a more experienced designer from Daniel Chan. If you want to start a career as a UX designer after understanding design thinking, basic research, what skill do we need to learn to start UXD career? I don't know what CTR PDP means from
I don't
product
know either.
design. Click through
Maybe
rate
some
probably. I
data
don't know.
points.
Yeah, yeah. Basically, how to start career as a new as a UX designer. Yeah. Tips from Wolfie.
So I have a biased answer, right? Because I love method. I love strategy. That is my profession, and I have an emphasis on this. For me, it is important to understand the value that design brings to the table, right? It depends on what kind of direction you find interesting, right? Whether you want to be more like on the product side, on the strategy side, or more like on the aesthetic side, right? Both of those are like very, very interesting. I personally am not a very good visual designer. I don't have a fancy triple page. I am not part of debates about typography, etc. But what I love to talk about is methodology. And I see an immense value in understanding design processes, to understand like the relationship of a problem definition and how it translates into objectives, how it translates into requirements, and understand that this method of design thinking, the method of innovation, is not just a free exploration, but it actually follows a process. It follows actually like steps that can help us to almost guarantee innovation. So that for me is like a critical skill. I know you wrote about like understanding design thinking and basic research. So those are the most important aspects to our profession. But I feel this is very critical. Also, how design thinking then translates into outcomes, right? Into business. Because there is a difference between a designer who's purely executional, who's just like building screens or interactive prototypes, decides what color the button is, what shape the button is, or a designer who asks, why are we putting that button there in the first place? What problem are we actually trying to solve? I personally find those more interesting. But maybe, Mas Borrys, also you have a different take on this.
Mine would be very straightforward. Daniel mentioned about understanding. I think it's time for you to start doing design. So I would say start looking for some. If you cannot find like full time, then find some pro bono, even like some voluntary work where you can apply this design thinking, and at the same time you're having that at the back of your mind what you mentioned, that it's important for you to have a structure, you have business thinking skill as well. So it's not just about like having a design as crafting, but also like how it serves the business. I think you can also like refer to the design principles that Ophias shared. Yeah. Okay.
Can I give a very practical advice here, Boris?
Yeah.
I love what you said, right? I have
Yeah.
we all have to interview a lot of designers, right? And I always see on Medium these like case studies around I redesigned Twitter or I redesigned Facebook or I redesigned Spotify, and these are all interesting things. But to be honest, those companies have hired very, very smart people who probably consider a lot of things and take a lot of care into making their decisions. So honestly, those things are not very insightful. And I honestly feel if somebody wants to get professional exposure and you might not have employment yet, take any NGO, any local animal shelter, or people who work with people with disabilities, or whatever social cause you care about. Go to their website, choose any. They're not that great, and help them make a better website. They'd be happy to get a designer to do it for free for them, and you have a very high chance of your design actually getting implemented. And you get an actual portfolio out of this. You get an actual case study out of this, of you designing something from scratch to production. And it benefits the world. I just have seen so many of this redesign Facebook or redesign Twitter posts. I can't stand them anymore. But if people care about something, there's so many opportunities to just try yourself out and jump into the deep end.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And in Indonesia, you have like so many, for example, small shops. We call it like warung, for example, even like a street food that probably it's big, but they don't have any online presence. Then there's opportunity, like Wolfie mentioned, you can help them to even create a like simple website. So that's like something that you really making an actual uh, product for like a real business, right? So don't make it like any fake case study anymore. Okay, okay. Wolfie, I get the last question, Wolfie. Before we close this, I am trying to pick which is the hardest question, but I have difficulty to decide which one. Maybe let's start with one first. So the principles make you mentioned about making it more objective, right? On something like you mentioned, like in many cases we went to the room and people with the we call it hippo, the highest paid individual will say something objective. Uh, this is more like a like challenging status quo questions, right? So, but isn't art subjective, right? So, if 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 we say, for example, just to make us more objective, then where does the art come from? If in us making the product, so and also like does it mean that principles actually make us less creative? Because everything is objective, right? So I don't know. Okay.
That is a hard question. I'm going to say something controversial then, okay? Because and I know that people will disagree with me. I don't think that UX design is art. I don't think that's the job that we're doing. I don't think our job is to create beauty or reflect on the human condition or be a mirror to society. That's not a job of a UX designer. We solve problems. That is not art. However, when it comes to creativity, I feel there is more nuance. Um, but I don't think that principles stop us from being creative. I feel they enable us because they provide us with like guardrails to explore, right? They're not being restrictive. They're not being prescriptive either. Principles are poles that you set for yourselves. Something saying something like keeping things ethical is not something you want to compromise on when exploring freely. And I doubt that this will limit anybody in their exploration or freedom of expression. So I feel no, principles don't make us less creative, but certainly they don't make us artists. And I don't think we should be artists. And I know that people will disagree with that, but that is my perspective.
Although we know that in Gojek design principle there's a principle called make it beautiful, right? Then if there's another discussion where how do you define beautiful again? So yeah, I think we will have some probably follow-up session on this. Okay, okay. Let me ask the audience first if there's any other question. Feel free to ask in Bahasa Indonesia if you feel it's you don't not comfortable saying it in English. But I mean, at a glance, Wolfie, people, if you do this in Indonesia, like people, I got more questions on the chat. I think
Yes, I can
we should
imagine.
yeah, I think we should have a session where how to teach people how to like have a confidence in speaking English, not their mother tongue. So
Yeah,
but yeah,
I
okay.
can resonate with that. It's not my mother tongue either. It's hard to be confident.
Okay, Wolfie, I think it's been 1 hour and 10 minutes. I think we just want to keep this to 60 minutes, and then
Yes.
everyone feel free to reach out to Wolfie again. I'm gonna put your Twitter here, Wolfie. Uh, so feel free to reach out, asking questions. I think Gojek is one of the earliest, if not the first, that has I would say a quite mature practice in design ops, where we got like uh, so many initiatives, like principles, process, and so on that I think you can learn a lot from. And then I think Wolfie will be the best person to answer and discuss with you on that matters. I think Wolfie, before we close, do you have any not last message? It seems like you're gonna go for uh, away for long. Just more like a advice on how principles actually will help people to build much better product.
Yeah. My hope is that principles can help people to claim their space, to claim authority. Because that is what I noticed most often is that designers feel this is all nice and good, but I simply don't have the authority to actually create change. And that is what I'd love to change, at least in the minds, at least in the way we think about this. Because principles elevated away from, oh, I'm just an intern. It doesn't matter because good ideas can come from anywhere and they do come from anywhere. And principles can help us identify those. And principles can give us the leverage to claim the authority we need. It gives us the ammunition to say things like, are you willing to take the risk for like failing? Or are you willing to like investigate like one more week of research? Are you willing to take that risk? Right? It gives us the leverage to turn it around and saying like, okay, so you want a speedy delivery, but we might actually like, are you willing to risk losing customers over this? Right? So this authority is what design needs to claim. The seat at the table is what design needs to claim. And principles can help with that. To say like we have something to contribute here. So this is sort of like my hope for what principles can be for especially people who are starting out at their careers.
Okay, all right. And as always, I think, like I mentioned, Wolfie, I'm sure like you wouldn't mind when people contacted you through Twitter, LinkedIn to discuss more about these principles and how to, like evangelize this and start in their company, right? So,
Absolutely. No, I'm always
yeah.
happy to engage. I also have a Calendly link where people can book time with me once a week or twice a week now.
Okay. I think you can share here if you want, or
Yeah,
people can
just
just,
let me.
yeah.
I'll send it to you. How can I give it?
There's a chat for us on the right side, private chat.
Got it. I just copy the link.
Yeah. And I can also put this into our link YouTube. So anyone who wants to speak to Wolfie, discussion, that's quite long, 60 minutes. Are you okay with that?
Yes, I
Okay.
prefer to go deep.
Okay.
It doesn't have to
Okay.
be
And
60 minutes, but yeah.
I'm gonna put this as well. So feel free to book Wolfie's time currently, and you are in Germany. So
Right now, for the next three
you
weeks,
are
time
behind
zone.
five
Yeah,
hours behind Indonesia, right?
but
You're
I
in
work on
Jakarta time?
Indonesian. I work on Indonesian
Oh,
time
Indonesia
zone.
time. Okay.
I get up very early. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right. Okay. I think that's all for everyone. Everyone, if you want to join our Telegram discussion, as always, you can always also like join our Telegram group. This is mainly in Bahasa Indonesia, Wafi, but feel free to join. I think we would love to have you in the group, as well. You can learn some Indonesia if you want. And also, just to remind everyone that we have quite a lot of speakers sign up for the next 2 months actually. So we'll have for this Wednesday, we're gonna have this. So Wafi, we have this session called I don't know how to say in English, but doing Figma together basically.
Nice.
So I will like pick a case or some features, and then we will go through. For this one, we are gonna learn about grid and auto layout. And then next week, we are going to have Mas Wisnu from Telkomsel, Global Innovation Champion for Telkomsel. So he will be sharing about innovation in corporate. So it's going to be also interesting topic. And if you look at the speakers lineup, we'll have Mas Diko from video, sharing about how the video can be the top 3 video streaming in South Asia. We have Rio as well from Tokopedia. I think it's going to be the same company as you, right? GoTo.
Yeah.
Tokopedia. We'll be sharing about how to survive as a new design manager. And then end of this month, we'll have Adam. I've known him for long. So he will be sharing about, so he's a game designer on a design studio, a game studio. So he will be sharing about designing a playful and gamification to engage customers. So you're gonna have a lot of very interesting topic lining up. And Wolfie, I think aside from this regular Monday design chit chat, we have also like more like an improvised session, which we call spontaneous chit chat. So I think probably you can be one of the guests at that 30-minute session. So we got talk more about more like a well-being, for example, or like how to cope with this COVID. So we can talk that probably it's going to be a very interesting thing to share as well. I know you're passionate about that, so I think it's going to be insightful for the audience.
Yeah, I'd love to. And I hope that I'm going to move to Indonesia soon. I've been
Oh
planning
yeah,
since
okay.
1.5 years,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
hopefully it happens.
Yes. Hopefully it happens. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Wolfie, for the time. Regards to your family and to your beautiful daughter as well. And then for everyone else, I'll see you on Wednesday di sisi Novikma bareng ya. Sekarang switch jadi bahasa Indonesia. Oke, semuanya thank you very much for your time, and then I'll see you on Wednesday. Stay safe and healthy. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.